In spite of the fact that the Las Vegas Strip is glistening with the promise of success, there was a shadowy presence hiding behind the familiar facade of one storefront that no television camera ever managed to capture. An empire was formed on history, authenticity, and trust, and Rick Harrison, the personable and knowledgeable businessman that people welcomed into their homes on a weekly basis through Pawn Stars, was the foundation of that empire. What would you do, however, if you discovered that everything you believed you knew about the pawnbroker with the encyclopedic intellect was actually fiction? Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation who conducted a search warrant at Harrison's expansive estate in Las Vegas were unprepared for what they found concealed within the walls of the seemingly ordinary home of the millionaire. There were 25 bodies that were well hidden. There are hidden rooms that contain evidence of crimes that have occurred over the course of decades. A collection of documents that establish a connection between the well-known face of reality television and organized criminal syndicates and dark market transactions. Despite the fact that the globe is still reeling from the disclosure, the guy who taught the United States about historical relics was also hiding the darkest secrets in history. A long way from the flash and glamour of Las Vegas, in Lexington, Kentucky, Rick Harrison's quest began. His birth took place on March 22, 1965, in the state of North Carolina. Throughout his childhood, he struggled with epilepsy, which was a significant factor in shaping his early life choices. As a result of being confined to bed during severe episodes, young Rick turned to books, which contributed to the development of a ravenous desire for information that would later become his trademark. His escape was found in the pages of history books, which served as an ironic basis for a man whose own history would later become a cautionary tale. 1981 was the year that the Harrison family made the move to Las Vegas, searching for opportunities amid the oasis of the desert. As early as 1989, Rick and his father had already established a gold and silver pawn shop, so setting the foundation for what would eventually become a significant enterprise. What started out as a little pawn shop eventually evolved into something quite remarkable, particularly after television producers saw the potential for entertainment that existed within the historical things that were being sold via their establishments. The first episode of Pawn Stars aired in 2009, bringing Rick Harrison into the living rooms of people all throughout the United States. Because of his tremendous expertise and financial acumen, as well as the seemingly genuine family dynamic that existed at the company, viewers were completely intrigued. The success of the show was phenomenal, and as a result, Harrison became a household name that is connected with historical understanding and trustworthy dealings. It wasn't until many years later that the absurdity of this perception would become immediately evident. Each episode showed Harrison providing an explanation of the historical value of various things, frequently rejecting counterfeits with an adept eye. Harrison was a man who was able to recognize a fake, but he had come to be the ultimate imposter himself. The pawn shop become a popular site for tourists. In addition, Harrison broadened the scope of his empire to encompass commerce, reading, and personal appearances. He was a self-educated guy who achieved his fortune through hard work, education, and dedication, and he was considered by the general public to be the embodiment of the American dream. When financial inspectors discovered inconsistencies in the transactions that took place at the pawn shop, some of the first cracks showed in the neatly constructed facade that Harrison had constructed. As patterns emerged which suggested that the legitimate business might be a front for illegal activity, what started off as a routine audit evolved into something much more sinister than it had been before. An inquiry was initiated by the Federal Bureau of Inquiry (FBI), with the first focus being on possible financial crimes, tax evasion, money laundering, and illicit activities. There was an expectation that agents would discover evidence of financial misconduct. The tragedy that awaited them behind the mansion's beautiful veneer was something that they were not prepared for. In the beginning, the search warrant execution that took place at Harrison's residence was conducted in a methodical and conventional manner. On the other hand, when the agents found the first concealed chamber in Harrison's study, which was concealed behind what seemed to be a solid wall, there was a worrisome turn of events in the investigation. Within the concealed location, the detectives discovered records that were methodically arranged and documented connections to figures involved in organized crime, black market transactions involving historical objects that were obtained illegally, and evidence that linked Harrison to an underground network of illicit operations. A frightening reality was brought to light by the materials. A great number of the objects that were exhibited on Pawn Stars had been obtained through unlawful means, and their origins had been fabricated for the sake of television. The shop that had established its name on authenticity was involved in the trafficking of stolen history, yet the physical evidence of financial crimes was insignificant in comparison to what the agents discovered as they continued their probe. The first of what would eventually amount to a total of 25 remains, victims whose disappearances spanned over 2 decades, was found in a concealed basement compartment that could only be accessed through a complex mechanism that was disguised as an ordinary bookcase. Unrelenting efforts were made by forensic investigators in order to identify the victims. People who looked to have connections to Harrison's illegal activities were among those who were present. Several of them were rivals in the trade of antiquities on the underground market. It was feared that certain details of Harrison's operation might be revealed by others. It seemed more likely that the concealment was a premeditated long-term operation than it was a crime of passion due to the systematic structure of the concealment. One victim at a time, the man who had built an empire on historical knowledge had been carefully erasing his own terrible history. He had worked to erase his own history. As soon as the news of the discovery became known, the response of the general population was one of astonished amazement. What could possibly be the connection between the amiable guy who enthusiastically offered historical information and the horrible atrocities described in the sentence? Former followers struggled with cognitive dissonance as they attempted to reconcile the Rick Harrison they believed they knew with the developing portrayal of a criminal who is calculated. In order to distance themselves from Harrison and the contaminated legacy of what had been their flagship program, the television network quickly decided to discontinue the show Pawn Stars. As a result of the decline in foot traffic to surrounding businesses, the gold and silver pawn shop, which was previously a popular tourist site, became a macabre curiosity. Visitors would take photographs of the facade of the shop from across the street. Officials in charge of tourism in Las Vegas worked hard to lessen the negative impact that the scandal would have on the city's reputation. Harrison's actions had effects that reached beyond him to include those who were closest to him. Even though Corey, his son, had played a significant role in the show, he continued to insist that he was completely unaware of his father's involvement in criminal acts. As detectives probed deeper, they discovered that there was no evidence that connected Corey to the crimes, which lends credence to his assertions of innocence. On the other hand, the younger Harrison found himself caught up in the aftermath of the decision. His personal reputation would be inextricably linked to the actions of his father. When Austin Chumley Russell, another frequent face at the shop, was interviewed, he showed disbelief and said that he had never suspected the dark currents moving beneath the surface of the firm. Despite the fact that the investigators did not discover any direct connection between Russell and the most serious crimes, they did discover evidence that suggests he may have been aware of certain financial irregularities. Pawn Star's pleasant comedic relief finds himself in the position of having to face minor charges connected to his inability to disclose suspicious behavior from the beginning. The information that was revealed completely broke the Harrison family. It was revealed that Rick's former wives had come forward with accounts of controlling conduct and strange absences, which when viewed in retrospect fit with the time frame of disappearances that are now attributed to him. Harrison was able to easily go from his illegal activities to family gatherings without displaying any signs of the darkness that existed within him, according to members of his family who described something that appeared to be pathological compartmentalization. As the date of the trial approached, in order to establish a direct connection between Harrison and the killings and the criminal business, the prosecution gathered sufficient evidence. The DNA evidence that was retrieved from the hidden chambers, the bank records that documented unlawful activities, and the testimony from associates who had witnessed Harrison's darker side all contributed to the creation of a case that was completely convincing. The defense team for Harrison made an effort to establish that their client had been set up by envious competitors or organized crime figures looking for a fall person, but the evidence that demonstrated his direct involvement was insurmountable. The trial turned into a media spectacle, with new revelations regarding the scope of Harrison's criminal network being made public on a daily basis. When former associates testified about his role in the trafficking of stolen antiques, they described how objects that had been extensively shown on Pawn Stars had been obtained unlawfully. For the sake of producing intriguing television, their histories were imagined. An individual who had previously worked as a dealer on the black market provided the testimony that was the most damaging to Harrison's defense. This individual revealed how Harrison had utilized his television stardom as the ideal cover for his criminal enterprise. Who would think that the individual who was teaching the United States about history on television was actually stealing it? According to the testimony of the witness, his public reputation was his most valuable asset. During the cross-examination that took place when Harrison took the stand in his own defense, his well-known poise completely disintegrated. His protestations were deconstructed in a methodical manner by the prosecution, who confronted him with evidence that disproved each of his claims of innocence. Only 6 hours of deliberation were spent by the jury before they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts, including several allegations of first-degree murder. Racketeering and the trafficking of stolen items go hand in hand. During the delivery of Harrison's punishment, which consisted of numerous life sentences without the possibility of release, the court made a note of the unique betrayal that was inherent in his acts. Knowledge, history, and trust were the foundations upon which you built your public reputation, but you personally desecrated some of those very virtues. The premeditated lie that you kept up for years in the public eye makes your actions far more despicable than they may have been otherwise. As Harrison was being carried out of the courtroom, the empire that he had constructed crumbled to the ground. The inventory of the pawn shop, which had reached the status of a landmark, was taken as evidence, and the shop was permanently shuttered. As opposed to being a celebration of history and business, the television show that had brought him fame eventually became a footnote in documentaries about genuine crimes. Following the events, Las Vegas made efforts to disassociate itself from the body of work left by Harrison. All references to Pawn Stars were deleted from promotional materials by tourism officials, and the shop building that had been unoccupied for some time was eventually razed to make room for new construction, removing any tangible reminder of the events that had taken place at that location. Despite the fact that the relatives of the victims eventually received answers regarding their loved ones who had gone missing, the closure that they experienced came with the terrible understanding of what had occurred. Memorial ceremonies were organized, bringing together those who were only united by the awful manner in which the lives of their family members had ended. As a disturbing reminder that appearances can be deceiving, the Rick Harrison case serves as a caution that the personalities we invite into our homes through our screens may conceal depths that we cannot ever begin to understand. In doing so, it forces us to contemplate the ease with which we place trust in individuals based on their perceived competence and charisma. The extent to which individuals who are competent in the art of deceit are able to deceive us totally. The ultimate tragedy of Rick Harrison is not just the lives that he killed, but also the violation of public trust, which is the degree to which he was able to convince millions of people that he was a man worthy of admiration, while simultaneously creating an empire on criminal activity and murder. The investigators mused on the intricacy of human nature as they closed the final chapter on the case. They wondered how a single person could possess both the astounding knowledge that Harrison demonstrated and the ability to deduce this information, as well as the intelligence that led to the investigation revealing the capability for premeditated violence. It became out that the individual who had made a living by verifying the authenticity of historical objects was in fact the most notorious forger of all time. Always keep in mind that the person you see wearing a mask may actually be hiding something. The shadows are where true character is revealed. It is in the decisions that are taken when no one is looking after you. It is important to remember that often the most dangerous predators are those who are lurking in plain sight, and the case of Rick Harrison draws our attention to the fact that we should look beyond charisma and celebrity. It is important to keep in mind that the next time you invite someone inside your home through your screen, the information that you view might simply be what they hope you see.